Welcome to Upfront. I'm Mary Ruth Harris. We are coming to you from the Shaw TV studios in Campbell River. Joining us today, Keisha Everson and Danita Lewis. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up this summer, there is going to be, I want to call it an event, but it's actually not an event. It's more of a curated show that goes on from end of June or the end of July all the way through to October, called Potlatch 6767. And it's going to be predominantly at the Comox Valley Art Gallery. But why don't you tell us a little bit about what the significance is?
So Potlatch 6767 was an idea that was come up with about a year and a half ago. Rob Everson, chief of the Giggle-Wallace Quagule, he realized that 2018 would mark 67 years since the potlatch ban was removed from legislation. And it only lasted for 67 years. So he saw in that a really powerful duality of 134 years of oppression and resilience, and how we as Canadians and as Indigenous peoples could look at that and kind of come towards it in a really meaningful way, to educate others and to do a little bit of deep soul searching around it, I suppose. So that was kind of the brainchild of that idea, and he brought it to Lee and then ended up bringing it to Andrea at the Comox Valley Art Gallery.
Okay.
Or Angela, sorry, Angela. At the Comox Valley Art Gallery, and she was like, yes, this sounds like something that's exactly up our alley. And that was, I think, last summer that they started talking about that, and then kind of moved into it. And then it became a lot more than just a art exhibit curated by guest curators of over a dozen artists. It became a number of other additional pieces. It became educational pieces and all these other different layers, that instead of calling it just an art exhibit, because it's so much more than that. The arts exhibit is one kind of piece of this kind of larger narrative that we're trying to educate everyone about.
So is this, did Chief Everson sort of view this as a continuation of the reconciliation process?
I think so. I think it was a way to jumpstart that a bit.
Yeah, I think that with everything that's going on with reconciliation, I think that that he definitely spearheaded wanting to really bring this into a thing that everyone can do together.
Right.
So it's not just an Indigenous thing, it's everybody doing this together.
So it launches on July 20th, is that correct?
July 20th, yes.
Okay, so the public are invited to that portion, right?
Everyone's welcome.
And that's, so they're closing down the road in front of the Comox Valley Art Gallery, right? And it's going to be there in the plaza and on the road?
I believe so.
Yeah.
I believe it'll be quite a big deal.
So it's a large gathering, and then, and that's the night that the exhibit actually opens. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Indigenous artists that are going to be participating. So they will all have created pieces that they are inspired to create around the idea of it. The ban was in place for 67 years, and now it's been lifted for 67 years. Is that right? Okay.
So we, Rob and Lee, our guest curators, they approached a number of artists. They sent them letters asking, would you like to be a part of this? This is our vision, this is what we'd like to do, these are the dates, these are some of the potential commitments of coming to like the opening and doing like an artist panel at some point. And the form of it, we left very, very open. It was ideally create a new work around the potlatch ban and around Potlatch 6767 and what that means to them as an Indigenous person.
Okay.
And a number of the artists, they come from various different backgrounds. A large number of them are from the West Coast. They're Kwakwaka'wakw, they're Haida, they're Nuu-chah-nulth, they're Haisla, they're Nuu-chah-nulth. There's a number that have those backgrounds, and then a few from further into the interior, because the potlatch ban wasn't just about the potlatch, it also impacted the powwow and the Sundance as well into Alberta and further east.
Oh, okay. Maybe you could explain for our viewers a little bit more about the significance of the potlatch itself. What happens at a potlatch that makes it such a big deal to Indigenous communities?
So right now we're trying to find that connection for students, because that's a large part of what we do. So our analogy that we very often have is like, imagine that it's your birthday and you're going to have a party and you're going to celebrate and all the great things, because we're trying to relate to, we're two children that are fairly young, about what this could be, what that could be for them and how exciting that is, and gathering together to help them have a little bit of understanding of what the potlatch is, because the potlatch is a lot more than just the singing and dancing that we see at days like National Indigenous Peoples Day.
Right.
It's so much more. So the potlatch is the core of our social, economic, judicial, financial, spiritual system.
Oh, okay.
So it's where we name our children. It's where we have weddings, where we have divorce, where we remember people who've passed away. It's where a chief would pass on rights and names to descendants. A potlatch is where we would also, some potlatches traditionally would take weeks to kind of complete, because all of the guest chiefs would tell about their connections to the host, and they would tell their entire lineage and their history. And because...
So all of these things happen at the potlatch?
All of these things happen at the potlatch. Today they happen in 1 to 2 days, usually on weekends, because we all have very busy lives and we want as many people as possible to be able to attend potlatches. But there's so much more than singing and dancing. So when we say that the potlatch band existed for 67 years, we're saying that there were 67 years of children who were not legally allowed to be named, and weddings that weren't allowed to happen, and remembrance of ancestors, and that oral history, because our language was not written down. We didn't need a written language because we kept our history by gathering into a room of 500 people in a big house and telling all of them our history. And then it was our responsibility to remember with a collective consciousness.
Okay.
Which I find very beautiful and very amazing. So the potlatch band is so much more than just singing and dancing.
And to explain that to children,
right?
The idea back to the birthday, when we gather in Western society, we normally get presents and we get all the things that we want.
Right.
And in a potlatch, what happens, it's about giving everything that you have, and you're the richest person when you give away everything that you have.
Oh, okay.
So, and the idea of songs and dances being illegal to practice,
right.
What I relate that to when I'm teaching is everyone has a cell phone or an iPod, or, you know, they listen to music, the students, and I say, you know, who listens to music? And of course everyone listens to music. Who dances? Now, can you imagine if we had a school dance and we had to do it in private, if we had to do it and hide from the police? Otherwise, your parents are going to get thrown in jail.
Right.
Or you're going to get taken away from your parents for practicing this.
Right.
And that's the part where the students really, they will connect with that, because no one can imagine what that would be like.
Right. Now,
so just, yeah.
You are both teachers here in the Campbell River School District 72. And what age group do you teach?
I teach K to 8.
Okay. And how about you, Keisha?
Right now I teach K to 12, so I work with an elementary school and a high school, and then I work with elementary schools as well.
Okay. So what is your connection, other than the personal connection you have to Potlatch 6767? How are you bringing in your professional talents to this particular event?
Okay.
Well, I have a program that's called First Nation Studies, and roughly 400 students in the middle school take this program. So those are the things that we talk about in the program. So they get a brief history of our Canadian shared history that you wouldn't find in a textbook.
Right.
So we're creating right now lessons around the Potlatch ban, and we're doing that in collaboration with School District 71.
Which is Comox Valley?
Comox Valley,
Okay.
yeah. So the lessons will be good to go by the end of next week, and then they will be distributed to all of the teachers in SD 72 and SD 71.
At all age levels?
At all age levels,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. And so this is kind of an educational package that's going to be an accompaniment to the curated display?
Yeah, we've had a lot of interest from various teachers, from both school districts, from either the district principal of Indigenous education, or even like the superintendent, that they're like, we believe in this, we want to support this, and we would like to see our students go through this exhibit. The exhibit itself is called Hiistaam, which is the copper will be fixed. Because the copper is the core of our banking system and is the core of our Potlatch system. And we didn't just want to say, okay, like go to the exhibit and check it out with your students, because we often find with teachers who are being asked to teach about anything Indigenous, about residential schools, about the 60s scoop, about Indigenous history, that they're very hands-off. I need someone to come in and teach this, I'm unsure. So we wanted to create a package that can be taught by anyone, that's very inclusive and has lots of room for adaptation for various grade levels. And lots of extension activities as well, so that if a teacher wants to take it way further, they can do an art activity, they could do a written reflection, they could go into all these extension pieces.
So you have created a framework in which the teachers can then take that framework and then share that with the students in the classroom, and then take them to the actual art gallery to see the exhibit. And will any of the artists, like, do you know the schedule yet for when the artists will be around? Or I do know it's going to go until October 4th. Okay. So really you have 5 weeks in the fall
and
to get a lot of students.
September's a pretty tricky time for a lot of teachers.
It's very tricky.
Establishing relationships and routines, and then you also have Orange Shirt Day at the end of September. So there's a lot going on in September. So that's why we wanted to have this package sent out before the summer hits, so that teachers can see it before and they can kind of have a little bit of planning for next year, that maybe that's something that they can work into, even if it's a couple of those lessons and a trip to the museum or the gallery. They can actually go and see that.
Okay, awesome. Is there a video component?
To a certain extent, it's in the works right now. We'd like to, our original vision was to interview a number of Indigenous elders, quite a few Kwakwaka'wakw from like Comox area all the way up to Port Hardy. And interview them and hear about their experiences, because we have people in our communities who remember what it was like to live under the Potlatch ban, or what it was like just afterwards, because even though the Potlatch ban was lifted in 1951, it still had a really large impact on communities all the way up to today. It has had a huge impact on our culture.
Okay. Danita, what are you hoping that the students themselves will come away with after they've had they've been involved in the framework educational piece and they have the opportunity to go through the exhibit? What do you hope that they come away with?
I hope that they would come away with another perspective. I hope that they would walk away being more caring, compassionate, and realizing that this history is a shared history, so that we're all in this together. That's what I'm really hoping for.
Okay. And what are the ways that the greater community can be involved in this, or how are they being involved in this?
Well, we've hosted the blanket exercise in the Comox Valley, and so we've done that, and we're talking about doing it again possibly in August. There's been a lot of requests.
We hosted our first, it was the very beginning of March, and then the second one was actually just hosted 2 weeks ago, 2 Fridays ago, I think. And there was a really strong reaction from a lot of attendees, like from June and also from back in March, about like, need to see this again, like I have friends and family. Would you consider offering a version for children, which I do in the school district, and that we would have to have some
maybe
talk
you
around
could
that.
explain what the blanket exercise is for those who haven't had the privilege to participate yet.
So the blanket exercise is not our design. It was actually designed and created by an organization called Kairos.
Okay.
And the blanket exercise is an experiential healing activity that walks participants through Indigenous history from pre-contact, before colonial times, all the way up through to today. So we get to experience, as participants, all of the legislation that has had a huge impact on Indigenous peoples.
Okay.
You get to experience, this makes it sound like all like happy and cheerful, which it's not at all. It's very emotionally impactful for quite a few people that go, I did not know half of this, and I knew this, but didn't understand really in my heart how it felt. So it's hosted on blankets, and the blankets represent Canada, represent the land that we live on. And as the exercise happens, the blankets get folded up smaller and smaller, and the space that the participants get to occupy becomes smaller and smaller to help them have that kind of experience that sense of uncomfortableness that comes from the reserve system, that comes from residential schools and the 60s scoop and the Indian Act and the Potlatch ban. So when Danita and I run it with the greater community, it's quite a huge affair. We've had elders there to hold space for participants because people have a very emotional response. We have volunteers who help with some of the behind the scenes kind of acting. We're playing roles, we're taking on roles of the European
so it's
kind of mindset.
Very participatory exercise. Okay. Yep.
And it's highly educational, and I've been fortunate enough to run the exercise with various school groups in SC72 and seeing it hosted with adults in SC71 and in the Comox Valley has been really great. We always get very interesting responses, very often positive or like emotionally impacted, and very much people saying, I want to see more of this. So that's one way that we're engaging the community with reconciliation and fostering that conversation about Indigenous history, about our shared Canadian history that we very often forget or don't see in our school textbooks.
When did the residential school system start? What year was that? Just approximate. 18?
There's lots of really different numbers on that one. Some people say 1820.
Okay.
But kind of right from the beginning, it feels like.
And it went all the way to 1996, which for me was shocking. I had the opportunity to participate in a day-long workshop run by an Indigenous gentleman who, this is what he does, and he helps corporations to educate their public or to educate their staff around what some of the challenges are and why those challenges exist. And getting that background was shocking. I had no idea that it was 1996 when the last one closed. And the other thing that came up for me was that, of course, we've seen what's been happening in the States with the separation of the children and the parents. And one of the first comments I saw on Facebook, well, yeah, not a big deal for Canada. We've been doing that to the Indigenous people for 200 years. And it was like, it just helped bring it home for, I think, for a lot of people.
I read an article actually this morning as I was on my computer, and this article came up, and it's like don't go judging the U.S. too harshly because we're just as bad. And the statistic that they had in there is even worse than one that we actually added in a statistical component to our last blanket exercise, just to give participants kind of an idea of this is why it's going to take a lot of hard work. And this is like, because the exercise ends on maybe a bit of a positive, hopeful note, we still have a really long way to go. So we said, what if we included some of those statistics that Indigenous people like lead in that you don't really want to lead in? And one of those statistics was around children in foster care. And the statistic that I had was that it was 48% of children in foster care today
Right.
are Indigenous.
Yes.
And the article that I read, it said it's 52%, and Indigenous children make up only 8% of the population of that same age group.
Right.
So that's showing that separation that we're seeing from children and their parents is huge in our Indigenous populations.
Right.
And that comes from this long history that we have of assimilation and colonization and cultural genocide.
Right.
Yeah.
As teachers, how do you overcome any racism that you're faced with in the classroom? Because I'm sure you are, because it's prevalent in every corner of society, and of course children learn what they hear about at home. So how do you interact with a child that shows up with that?
I know for myself, I've received some letters from parents, and my response is I feel that it gives me further strength in what I'm doing, that teaching the youth the history that has been forgotten about in textbooks, that we're on the right lines right now, that the generations before, there's this huge gap of missing knowledge. So when they don't have the correct information, it's hard to be upset with that.
Right.
It's not their fault, right? That they're ignorant to the truth.
Then in that case, how is it you respond to the parents that have sent those letters? Do you see it as a teaching moment?
I deal directly with the students,
Okay.
and when I have received letters like that, I'll pass it on to my administration.
Oh, okay.
So I don't think that that would be my position to deal directly with a parent that has, that wants to bash based on
Right.
color or heritage.
And just bad understanding of what it is
A
they're saying.
misunderstanding.
Right.
And yeah, so my job is to teach the students, and when I'm out doing the job in the community, I will teach the people that show up that are wanting to be a part of reconciliation, and that gives me hope. Like those people that show up, that's what gives me hope.
Okay. With the exhibit starting in July and going all the way through to October, it is going to give a large portion of the population an opportunity to go through, not just here on the island, but of course we are flooded with tourists all summer long. And of course a lot of them do check out the local art galleries and the local museums. So what are you hoping that they will walk away with when they leave?
I hope they learn something. I hope they find compassion and understanding and have their eyes opened in a new way. I've heard about some of the different pieces that the artists are creating, because some of them are finished or in progress, and I'm personally really excited to see them, because the perspectives that they have on the Potlatch band are all very unique. They all have very different stories and very different backgrounds and experiences with colonization and with their heritage and their culture. So I'm really excited for people to see that and to walk away with their eyes just a little more open and their heart just a little more open as well to the idea that Canada is not perfect and was not founded on the principles that we see in our textbooks always, and that we can work towards reconciliation together, because it's not just one person's job to fix that.
And also understanding the language revitalization that's happening right now, because that is a huge part of what has happened. Is when you take away a culture's language, you kill the culture.
Right.
And that was the idea. So right now there's a big force, there's a big push in language revitalization. And I'm not sure if you're missing a big piece of the puzzle and you don't understand why that happened. It's hard for an average Canadian to say, well, what's all the big deal with language revitalization? That's all over the news. So I think that that will put some of the pieces of the puzzle together for some people.
Well, there's a big project happening right now in Campbell River, and I think it might have just finished. It was in the news yesterday, like in the Comox Valley Record, talking about that they have partnered a young Indigenous woman from the high school with 1 or 2 elders. And so they've been able to get it on tape. They've been able to get the language onto tape, and they're creating iPad, I can see the excitement on your face.
This student is very, very dear to my heart, and she graduates next week, and I probably will be there, and I probably will cry. Because, this student, you know who you are, and I love you so much. And someone reached out to me and said, like, we have this opportunity for an Indigenous student to do voiceover work for this story about a little girl and her pet dragon.
Okay.
So some of our language elders, Emily Aitken and Diana Madelpy, they have worked with her on her pronunciation and even on creating some words for this. We don't have a word for dragon in Kwakwa.
Oh, okay.
So originally the story was created back east in South Korea, I think, actually.
Yes. And
so they had to come up with words for some things, and they actually worked with the student to create all this voiceover work for this character whose name I think is Sally. And
awesome.
Yeah, I'm so excited to see that. I just saw like a snippet of like one episode or chapter of the story, and I'm really excited to see it finish. It's going to be on iPads, and I'm hoping that those will be shared with the school district. That would be great for students to see that in a really accessible way.
Now, we don't have much time left, but I do want to ask you, and if you can find a 30-second answer. You've both mentioned numerous times textbooks, that the textbooks seem to be sorely lacking in appropriate factual information. Is there a movement amongst the education brain trusts of various provinces to fix that?
Oh, I hope so.
And is that something that maybe you can be the champions for?
30 seconds. I just read an article that Alberta is actually leading the way in this right now. So they're making sure that all public servants are getting trained on our Canadian history, and they're working with 60 different elders and many different nations to create curriculum that they can change the textbooks. So right now they're leading the way, and I think that it'll so I imagine that
it'll ripple out from there.
With our positions, we'll be creating a lot more
and pursuing that options. Okay, awesome. Well, Danita Lewis and Keisha Everson, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm looking forward to seeing the exhibit and taking part in blanket exercise, and it's a really wonderful way to engage face to face between cultures and between nations. So thank you for all the work you're doing, and thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you so much.
You've been watching Up Front. I'm Mary Ruth Harris. We'll see you again.